There is a jet sitting on a runway in Shenyang, China, right now that does not look like anything the United States Air Force has ever put into the sky. No tail fins, no vertical stabilizers at all. A wide, flat, diamond-shaped body that looks more like a stealth bomber than a fighter jet. And according to a growing number of defense analysts and satellite photo trackers, this aircraft, known as the J-50, might be the most significant shift in fighter jet design in decades. If it does what China claims it can do, it would put a sixth-generation combat aircraft in the sky, years before America's own next-generation fighter program is even expected to fly. If you are enjoying this already, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. By the time this video is over, you will understand what the J-50 actually is, why its tailless design is such a big deal, what we actually know versus what is still speculation, and why the Pentagon is reportedly taking this aircraft a lot more seriously than China's previous fighter jets. Let's get into it. The story starts, as it so often does with Chinese military hardware, with a blurry photograph. In late December of 2024, photos began circulating online showing two new and unusual aircraft flying over Chengdu and Shenyang on the same day. One was a large, tailless, diamond-shaped aircraft spotted near Chengdu, widely believed to be linked to the Chengdu Aircraft Corporation, and now generally referred to as the J-36. The other, spotted the same day over Shenyang, was a smaller, twin-engine, also tailless design that analysts quickly nicknamed the J-50 after the Shenyang Aircraft Corporation's internal naming conventions. Two brand-new, radically different stealth aircraft from two competing state-owned design bureaus photographed flying on the exact same day. That kind of coordinated reveal does not happen by accident in China's defense industry. It happens when the government wants the rest of the world to notice. And the world did notice. Within days, the photos had been picked up by aviation journalists, satellite imagery analysts, and former Air Force officers across the United States, all trying to answer the same basic question. What exactly are these aircraft, and what do they tell us about where Chinese air power is headed? To understand why the J-50 in particular has people inside the Pentagon paying close attention, you need to understand what it does not have. A conventional fighter jet, going all the way back to early jet aircraft in the 1940s, almost always has a vertical tail fin, sometimes two, sticking up from the rear of the fuselage. That tail fin provides what aerospace engineers call yaw stability, essentially the aircraft's ability to keep its nose pointed in the direction it is actually flying, rather than slipping sideways through the air. For decades, this was treated as a basic, non-negotiable requirement of stable flight. The J-50 does not have one. Neither does its larger cousin, the J-36, spotted the same day over Chengdu. Both aircraft use what is known as a tailless or diamond wing planform, where the entire body and wing structure blends into one continuous shape, with no separate vertical surfaces at all. This is not a new idea. The American B-2 stealth bomber, which first flew back in 1989, also has no vertical tail. Northrop Grumman's experimental X-47B drone used a similar tailless design. But building a tailless bomber that flies relatively slowly and predictably is a very different engineering problem than building a tailless fighter jet that needs to turn hard, change direction rapidly, and remain controllable during aggressive maneuvers, all without the stabilizing surface that fighter designers have relied on since the start of the jet age. Without a vertical tail, an aircraft has to manage yaw control through other means entirely. That typically means relying on thrust vectoring, where the engine nozzles themselves can pivot slightly to help steer the aircraft, combined with extremely sophisticated flight control software that can make hundreds of tiny corrections per second that a human pilot could never make by hand. Both the J-50 and the J-36 are believed to rely heavily on exactly this kind of fly-by-wire computer control to stay stable in the air at all. Why would anyone bother going through all of that trouble? The answer comes down to one word that has driven fighter design for the last 25 years: stealth. A vertical tail fin is one of the largest flat vertical surfaces on a conventional aircraft, and flat vertical surfaces are extremely good at reflecting radar waves directly back toward the radar that sent them. Remove the tail entirely, and you remove one of the largest single contributors to an aircraft's radar signature. The flattened, blended, diamond-shaped body of the J-50 is built around the same underlying philosophy that shaped the B-2 bomber decades earlier. Minimize sharp angles, minimize vertical surfaces, and blend every component into the smoothest possible shape in order to make the aircraft as close to invisible on radar as physically achievable. So why is this specific aircraft, rather than the larger J-36 spotted the same day, getting so much attention from American defense analysts? Size and role. The J-36 is large, reportedly close to the size of a heavy bomber, and is widely believed to be designed primarily for long-range strike missions, the kind of aircraft that would be used to hit targets deep inside enemy territory from a significant distance away. The J-50, by contrast, is smaller, appears to have 2 engines instead of 3, and is generally believed to be designed as an actual air superiority fighter, the kind of aircraft meant to go head-to-head with other fighter jets in contested airspace. That distinction matters enormously to military planners, because an air superiority fighter is the kind of aircraft that would directly threaten American F-22s and F-35s in any future conflict, particularly in a scenario centered around Taiwan or the broader Pacific. A long-range bomber-like aircraft is a serious concern in its own right, but a genuinely capable tailless stealth fighter, one that can dogfight and still remain difficult to detect on radar, is the kind of aircraft that changes the calculus of an actual air battle. Here is where it is important to slow down and separate what is actually confirmed from what is still informed speculation, because a lot of the coverage of the J-50 online blends the two together without much distinction. What is confirmed, through multiple independent satellite images and ground-level photographs taken from public roads near Chinese military airfields, is that a tailless, twin-engine aircraft with a diamond-shaped planform has flown multiple test flights out of facilities associated with the Shenyang Aircraft Corporation, beginning in late December of 2024 and continuing through 2025. Additional photographs throughout 2025 showed the aircraft in different paint schemes and configurations, suggesting an active and ongoing flight test program rather than a single one-off demonstration flight. What is not confirmed, at least not through any officially released Chinese government information, includes basic performance figures. There is no confirmed top speed, no confirmed combat radius, no confirmed radar cross-section measurement, and no confirmed weapons loadout. China's Defense Ministry has not issued an official name for the aircraft, has not confirmed the J-50 designation that analysts and aviation media have settled on, and has released essentially no official information about the program at all. Everything beyond the visual shape of the aircraft and the rough timeline of its test flights is, to one degree or another, informed analysis built from photographs rather than confirmed specification. That gap between visible shape and confirmed capability is exactly where a lot of the more dramatic headlines tend to live. Some reports have suggested the J-50 may incorporate variable cycle engine technology, an advanced jet engine design that can shift its internal airflow configuration to optimize for either high-speed dash performance or fuel-efficient cruising, depending on the mission. The United States has been developing similar variable cycle engine technology for its own next-generation adaptive propulsion program, intended to power America's future sixth-generation fighter. If China has genuinely fielded a flying prototype with this kind of engine before the United States has even finished testing its own version, that would represent a meaningful and somewhat uncomfortable shift in the usual order of these things, where American aerospace technology has generally led rather than followed. This is part of why the reaction inside the Pentagon and across the broader American defense community has been notably different from China's previous stealth fighter reveals. When the J-20 was first revealed back in 2011, the general reaction in Washington was measured skepticism, with many analysts pointing out that China's existing jet engine technology likely could not yet support the airframe's design ambitions, and that the aircraft's stealth shaping showed clear signs of being derived from leaked or stolen American and Russian design data. The J-20 was taken seriously, but it was generally treated as a capable fourth-and-a-half-generation aircraft, trying to look like something more advanced than it actually was under the surface. The reaction to the J-50 and the J-36 has been noticeably less dismissive. Part of that comes down to timing. The United States Air Force's own next-generation air dominance program, intended to produce America's first sixth-generation fighter, has moved through a much slower and more uncertain path than originally planned, with budget reviews, design pauses, and shifting requirements stretching the program's timeline well past its original targets. Boeing was eventually selected in 2025 to build the resulting aircraft, now designated the F-47, but it is not expected to be operational until sometime in the early 2030s, at the absolute earliest. China appears to have at least 2 distinct tailless next-generation aircraft already flying test flights years before that American program is expected to deliver a single combat-ready jet. That timeline gap is the actual source of the unease, far more than any single confirmed performance number. It is entirely possible, and even likely, that the J-50 currently flying around Shenyang is still a long way from being an operational, combat-ready fighter. Prototype aircraft frequently take many years to mature from first flight into genuine frontline service, And China's own J-20 took roughly a decade to move from its earliest test flights into meaningful operational squadron deployment. But the underlying signal being sent is less about where the J-50 is today and far more about the direction Chinese aerospace engineering is now confidently moving in, and how quickly it appears to be closing a generational technology gap that only 15 years ago looked nearly insurmountable. There is also a broader industrial story sitting underneath all of this that does not get talked about nearly as often as the aircraft's silhouette does. China now operates two competing state-backed aircraft design bureaus, Chengdu and Shenyang, both apparently developing entirely separate sixth-generation tailless designs in parallel, and both apparently far enough along to be conducting active test flights within roughly the same window. That kind of parallel development, two competing next-generation fighter programs running simultaneously inside the same country, is an extremely expensive and resource-intensive approach that very few nations can actually sustain. The United States, by comparison, is currently pursuing one primary sixth-generation fighter program for the Air Force, alongside a related but distinct program for the Navy. China appears to be running two large advanced fighter programs at once, which says something significant about the scale of resources Beijing is currently willing to commit to advanced military aviation. None of this means the balance of air power has already shifted, and it is worth being careful about that distinction. The United States still operates the largest and most experienced fleet of operational stealth fighters in the world, with hundreds of F-35s already in active service across multiple branches and allied nations, backed by an enormous logistics, training, and maintenance network built up over more than 2 decades of real-world operational experience. China's tailless aircraft, however advanced their underlying design philosophy might be, are still unproven prototypes without any confirmed combat history, without confirmed engine performance figures, and without any confirmed timeline for actual operational deployment. The gap between a handful of photographed test flights and a combat-ready squadron remains a very large one, and history has shown that gap can take the better part of a decade to close, even for an aircraft program with strong government backing. What seems to have genuinely shifted is something a little less tangible than raw capability, and a little harder to put a number on. For most of the last several decades, the assumption inside American defense planning was that the United States set the pace in advanced fighter design, and that China's role was largely to study, adapt, and eventually catch up to whatever the United States had already built. The J-50 and the J-36, regardless of how their actual performance eventually shakes out once more information becomes available, represent a design philosophy that does not appear to be copying anything the United States has already fielded. There is no American tailless air superiority fighter currently flying. There is no equivalent operational American aircraft to compare the J-50 directly against. For the first time in a long while, China appears to be building toward a category of aircraft the United States has not yet built itself, rather than chasing one that already exists. That, more than any single leaked photograph or unverified spec sheet, is likely the real reason this aircraft is generating the level of attention it currently has. It is not that anyone inside the Pentagon believes the J-50 is about to roll off the assembly line next year and tip the balance of power across the Pacific overnight. It is that the aircraft represents a visible, photographed, undeniable signal that Chinese aerospace engineering is no longer simply following the established playbook from a distance. It is actively writing new pages of its own, and doing it in full public view, with satellite trackers and aviation photographers documenting nearly every test flight along the way. Whether the J-50 ultimately becomes a frontline combat aircraft, a specialized test platform that quietly retires after proving out a handful of new technologies, or something in between, is still genuinely unknown, and will likely remain unknown for years. But the aircraft sitting on that runway in Shenyang has already done something that matters, regardless of its eventual fate. It has changed the conversation happening inside defense ministries, from Washington to Tokyo to Canberra. From a conversation about catching up to China, to a conversation about what China might be building next, and whether anyone else currently has a clear answer for it. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let us know. Do you think the J-50 will actually reach operational service before America's own sixth-generation fighter does? Or is this still mostly hype built on a handful of blurry photographs? And if you want more videos like this one, check out what's on screen right now.